sequence. I'll speak first, and then it'll migrate down the table. That's all I'm doing.
Right. Just so you don't get confused about which talking head is talking.
That's particularly helpful for people.
Well, thank you all for coming this morning. The purpose of the briefing this morning is to bring you up to date on some new initiatives and further cooperation between the United States and Russia as a result of the 6th Gore Chernomyrdin Commission meeting, which concluded yesterday. With us today to give you an overview is Dr. Ash Carter, the ASD for International Security Policy. Following Dr. Carter is Mr. Jim Baker of the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration. Then Ms. Sherri Goodman, who is the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security, and Rear Admiral Paul Gaffney, who is the Commander of the Naval Meteorological and Oceanographic Command, will brief on some specific environmental aspects of this new cooperative effort. And at the end of the presentation, they will all be available to answer some of your questions. And with that, Dr. Carter.
Well, thank you for coming. Dr. Perry attended for the last 2 days the 6th meeting of the so-called Gore Chernomyrdin Commission, which it's hard to believe it's been 6 now, but they are held twice a year, and Dr. Perry's attended every one. This is a forum where the Vice President gathers together the departments and agencies of the U.S. government, and the Prime Minister of Russia gathers together the ministries of the Russian government, and they work together on problems of common concern. And if you like, exploit the opportunities that we now have for cooperation, whereas for a long time we didn't have enough contact to know where our common interests lie and didn't have a spirit of cooperation. And what's remarkable about the Gore Chernomyrdin Commission, and what we're going to give you today, what I regard, and I'm sure you will regard as a remarkable example, is what's remarkable about it is the large number of very interesting, very tangible cooperative projects we have between our government and the Russian government. Dr. Perry gave a presentation to the Vice President and Prime Minister Chernomyrdin on cooperation in the defense field. And his presentation ranged from U.S.-Russian cooperation in Bosnia peace implementation to the Nun-Lugar program, where we have hundreds of millions of dollars of cooperative projects with the Russian government eliminating nuclear weapon systems, converting defense factories in Russia to commercial purposes, and a whole host of other activities that this department does with agencies of the Russian government. Dr. Perry is the chair on the U.S. side of the Defense Conversion Committee, but DOD is active, it turns out, in all the other committees as well. Energy, and the example we're going to give you today, in the environment. It just happens that as we get to know one another and get these habits of cooperation going, we hit upon unexpected but very tangible opportunities for cooperation. With that introduction, I think Jim Baker is going to describe this rather remarkable example of tangible cooperation.
Thanks, Ash. I wanted to just give a brief background on this process that we call the Environmental Working Group, because the roots of it really go back to the late 70s and early 80s, when Al Gore was first in the House and then in the Senate, with his dream of trying to see if we couldn't fully utilize all of the assets of the country to provide environmental information. He's had a long interest in that, and what you see here, these very tangible results, as Ash mentioned, come because of Al Gore's very strong commitment to seeing if we couldn't have a real civil military intelligence community connection. In the late 80s, he was very instrumental in working with the Navy to see if ice data from the Arctic could be released in a way that didn't harm national security, but still was valuable to the scientists who are studying global change in the Arctic. And in fact, that led to the decision by the Navy in 1990 to in fact release some information based on the sonar information that was there. Well, following that up, then Senator Gore met with Gates of CIA and established an environmental task force where there were a group of cleared scientists and members of the defense community and intelligence community came together to see if there was potential application of this classified information that we had in the U.S. and see if there were ways that some of it could be released or some information based on the assets could be released to make it work. And Linda Zoll is here today from the CIA. She's been the central figure from the very beginning. She and I and then Senator Gore met with members of the intelligence and defense communities in 1991 and helped pull together the first steps in that process, and Linda can answer some questions about how that worked. Well, with that background, the Vice President was very interested in seeing if we could do a similar kind of activity with the Russians under the Gore-Chernomyrdin Commission. The commission itself was an idea of the Vice President. Let's try to bring together our two countries and see if we can help Russia make this transition to a market economy. We sat down with the Vice President's blessing to see if we could make this happen and held what we call the Ecological Environmental Seminar just last year, May 1995, outside Washington, where we had people from our defense and intelligence communities, their defense and intelligence communities, and also the science communities come together to see if, in fact, there were some projects that we could jointly work on. Out of that process, we have formed an environmental working group that I co-chair together with the Minister of Environment from Russia, Minister Danilov-Danilin. And there have been a number of ideas that have come out of the conference. In August, we signed the terms of reference of this activity to see if there were ways that we could get information without jeopardizing national security. And we were asked to report on the commission activities at this last meeting, which just finished. And this poster that we have up here lists the series of projects that, in fact, we have identified as ones where we think there will be real progress. Let me just quickly list those. We've had some real interesting exchange on military base cleanup, on cooperation between our two navies in the Arctic climatology. We have a project on disaster monitoring, on land use, one on oil and gas activities, and one on earthquake prediction. All areas where we know that the information that comes from national security assets, if properly protected, could in fact be valuable in a much broader community. And so we've been working together with the CIA and Linda Zoll, NOAA, the Department of Defense, EPA, USGS, and other agencies, working with the comparable agencies in Russia, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Energy, and a number of other agencies. And what we would like to present to you today is a little more detail on what was announced yesterday, specifically on those areas where the DoD is involved. We have the military base cleanup and this Navy-to-Navy exchange, both of which involve some exchange of data that has never happened before, and a process in place that is also unique. And I have to say again, it goes back to the vision of the Vice President who saw the opportunity to do something that couldn't be done before, this linking. So it's a Vice President Al Gore initiative, which has worked very well, and we're pleased to have the opportunity to show you some specifics about that. So, Sherri, you could talk about the DoD aspects.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. I'm pleased to be able to tell you today about one element of our collaborative work with our Russian colleagues, which is the exchange of derived products on a military base in the United States and on a military base in Russia. And I must underscore Dr. Baker's point about the Vice President's long-standing support for developing such products for environmental purposes. In the early 1990s, then Senator Gore conceived of the idea of asking the Department of Defense to prepare a series of diagrams or derived products from multiple sources of military facilities using classified intelligence capabilities to help determine specifically the possible locations and types of environmental contamination at these sites. The selection of the sites was based on changes occurring at that time in Central Europe, many of the former Warsaw Pact countries having inherited military bases formerly used by Soviet troops had inadequate information about the activities conducted on these bases and therefore had very little knowledge of the location or possible types of contamination there. In response to a request from the Czech Republic, formerly Czechoslovakia, the first derived products were created on 17 Czech bases several years ago. That effort proved so successful that similar efforts have been undertaken with several other Central European nations as well, the Baltic nations in particular. As Dr. Baker stated, at the Gore Chernomyrdin meeting in mid-1995, the Environmental Working Group was established, and they had several meetings in 1995 and agreed to consider cooperation in 6 areas. One of these is military base cleanup issues. This project aims to develop methodologies for comprehensively assessing, locating, cleaning up, and remediating environmental contamination at military facilities. The U.S. group here is led by my deputy, Gary Vest, and the Russian group is led by Mikhail Tokachev, the Deputy Minister of Russia's Environmental Protection and Natural Resource Department, basically their EPA. During the first phase of this project's work, the members agreed to create unclassified derived products from multiple classified sources on 2 military facilities in each country. And the first set of products was to focus on one site in each country contaminated primarily with petroleum, oils, and lubricants, or what's known as POLs. The U.S. delegation has prepared a derived product on Yesk Air Force Base near the Azov Sea, and that's the map you see, the several maps you see up there. And the Russian delegation prepared a derived product map on Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. They are both time-lapse analyses from the 1970s to the present. And examples of the latest photo from each of these sets is available at the table by the door. We plan to create another set of derived products for 2 other sites yet to be determined. The derived products illustrate locations and types of contamination at each military site over the last 20 years. And they also indicate possible pathways for contamination which could affect human, animal, or plant life in the surrounding region. Following this exchange, which has occurred this week at as part of the Gore Chernomyrdin Commission, the 2 countries will now compare the derived product information with other known information on the military base in their country to help assess the utility of using this classified intelligence capability to perform environmental characterization and assessments. If appropriate, field tests will be conducted at some or all of the sites. And in June of this year, the 2 delegations plan to prepare a report analyzing the utility of this derived information and making recommendations to determine subsequent steps. Now, this exchange is important for several reasons. First, from an environmental perspective, the use of the classified intelligence assets may help us save time, money, and manpower in identifying types and extent of environmental contamination and in providing a risk assessment based on the location of the pathways and the receptors, being the humans or animals. In that context, the work of both delegations has been very timely and thorough. Second, from a more general perspective of U.S.-Russian relations, this project is an outstanding example of establishing contacts and developing trust between 2 groups of people who have long been taught not to trust each other, members of the intelligence communities. It has also, I might add, helped develop relationships between the defense and intelligence, the defense and environmental communities in both our countries, which I believe is particularly valuable. And at a broader level, the sharing of such information between these 2 countries that have valuable intelligence assets under their command raises the possibility of sharing this information with other countries as well. As such, we will jointly be able to contribute to enhanced environmental knowledge throughout the globe. In sum, this project under the Vice President's leadership is an excellent example of using our nation's investment in national security during the Cold War to enhance environmental security today. Admiral Gaffney.
Thank you, Secretary Goodman. Good morning. Last night at the Russian Embassy, at a reception at the conclusion of the Gore Chernomyrdin Commission, and on Monday in the semi-annual meeting, Vice President Gore highlighted the growing cooperation between the oceanographic services of the U.S. Navy and the Russian Federation Navy. Specifically, he focused on a planned cooperative oceanographic survey for later this year, the summer of '96. Since 1993, representatives from the U.S. Navy and from the Russian Federation Navy oceanographic services have been meeting in various places, St. Petersburg, Savannah, New Orleans, Moscow, Monterey, California, to explore ways to increase cooperation between the two navies, and specifically in oceanography. In May of '95, this year, at the conference that Dr. Baker alluded to earlier, the Navy-to-Navy cooperative effort was discussed as a potential Gore Chernomyrdin Commission project under the Environmental Working Group, which Dr. Baker chairs, and it was subsequently selected as one of its projects. In December of this year, just before Christmas, I hosted at the Naval Oceanographic Office, which is located at the Stennis Space Center in, near Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, on the Gulf Coast, not far from New Orleans. I hosted a delegation of Russian oceanographers headed by my counterpart, Rear Admiral Solodov, for some discussions on how we might cooperate. We jointly agreed at that meeting to pursue a greater understanding of how we collect, analyze, and retrieve oceanographic data. We also agreed to pursue a cooperative survey, military oceanographic survey, in the Sea of Okhotsk, focusing on the northwest corner, hopefully, during the upcoming summer. We envision the cooperative survey to be about 20 to 25 days and to involve military survey vessels from each nation. At least from the United States, one ship, and it will probably be the USNS Silas Bent, which is already a ship that does work for me, that is already deployed in the Western Pacific right now. Further, in the spirit of cooperation, we hope to exchange a couple of, probably 2 or 3, oceanographers from each Navy to cross-deck and ride on the other Navy's ship as we're surveying sort of side by side each other for that 25-day period. And then immediately thereafter, or as soon thereafter as is practical, we plan to take copies of all the data that we collect on the U.S. Navy vessel, oceanographic vessel, and all the data collected by the Russian vessel, and exchange those. Some we'll be able to exchange at pierside at the conclusion of the survey. Some we'll have to do later because we won't have a Xerox machine big enough to make copies, for example. In December, right after our meeting in Mississippi, we came back to Washington to brief Mr. Gore personally on our plans because of his great interest, expressed personal interest in environmental matters and how the navies might be able to contribute to his overall goals. And as you might expect, there are many, many details to work out exactly about where we will survey, what do we do in case of bad weather, how do we communicate between the two ships, etc. And I hope to start working those final details out in late March in St. Petersburg when I meet with my counterpart again. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions?
May I ask Mr. Carter a question about START 2, maybe a little bit off the beaten path? There are a lot of analysts who think that, given the political situation in the Russian parliament, that they will be loath to give Yeltsin a sort of a victory by ratifying START 2 before the April summit. What's your assessment? Do you agree with that?
I can tell you that yesterday, Prime Minister Chernomyrdin indicated that while he couldn't be 100% sure that the Duma would ratify START 2, he had some hope that it would, and the Russian government would be attempting to secure ratification of START 2. My own assessment is perhaps no better than yours. The new Duma is organizing itself, doesn't know its own mind yet, being just reelected rather than facing reelection its members might, by that measure, be more inclined to do something like START 2 ratification than the previous Duma was, but obviously the political complexion of the Duma has changed as well. I think the fact that we ratified START 2 last week will help. I think the fact that the United States has made so much progress with Russians in the non-Lugar program and the implementation of START 1 will indicate that to the Russians that the implementation of START 2 can proceed smoothly as well. And so I'm by no means pessimistic that START 2 will be ratified before April, and that's our goal.
Yeah, for Admiral Gaffney, could you give us a little bit of a thumbnail idea of what sort of information will be gathered during this survey?
Sure. It'll be, I would say it would be classic oceanographic survey work, which means our idea is for the two ships to enter the Sea of Okhotsk around the center line and head due north on a line of longitude, and then start to, once they get near the northern part, to move to the west for about 20 days, collecting as they go information about the depth, bathymetry, temperature and salinity, taking current measurements, but without deploying anything on the bottom. There are instruments now where you can measure currents from a ship with a sonar type device without placing anything on the bottom. We'll take some samples of the bottom of bottom soil, if you will, sediment. Look at that. We'll do some chemical analysis of the water, and we'll collect routine weather information, sea surface temperature, things like that. Classic oceanographic survey, all unclassified. All the data will be shared, and we'll have scientists on board their ship and they on ours, and they'll be able to participate and watch while we do it. Actually, as interesting to us as collecting the data is learning how each other collects and analyzes data on scene, so that as we walk hand in hand together for the next 100 years, we can continue to cooperate on a better basis. Did you get the last part? Okay.
For Sherri, could you describe in a general way how badly polluted Russian military bases are and how that may compare to how badly polluted U.S. bases are?
Well, through this project so far, we have, as you know, looked just at one Russian military base. We believe largely from the open literature that the Russian military's practices in environmental management are have some way to go before they meet the American environmental management practices. So I would say that they are considerably more contaminated than American military bases, and I think that's one of the potential benefits to Russia from this project. And as we know from the work that has already been done of this type to document contamination at former Soviet bases in the Czech Republic and in the Baltics, there is considerable contamination that will take many years and millions and billions of dollars to address.
What sort of contaminants did you find, for example?
Here we were looking primarily at bases that are contaminated with petroleum, oil, and lubricants, which are things like your basic oil, jet fuel, everything that's associated in these two cases with the use of an airfield. We have plans in the future to then look at bases that have different types of contaminants. For example, we might look at in the future at bases that have radioactive type of contamination. We could look at a site here in the U.S. that is a DOE managed site, Department of Energy site, or a Russian nuclear site. We might also look at other type of contaminants, solvents, and inorganics that present different types of pollution problems.
Ms. Goodman, when do you expect to announce the next round of sites that will be part of the project? You mentioned another round.
We hope to announce those in the next couple of months.
Dr. Carter, the Congress has eliminated funding for the Defense Enterprise Fund. Is this going to eliminate these kinds of projects or seriously limit the ability to carry out these kinds of projects in the future?
This particular project is not funded through the Defense Enterprise Fund. There are important opportunities for funding American-Russian joint ventures that involve Russian defense firms on the one side and American companies on the other. Those are good opportunities for American business. They're good opportunities for American security, which is why the Defense Department is interested in supporting them. Our support in the Defense Enterprise Fund is not large. What it does is provide seed capital to those joint ventures. To us, that reduces the military production potential of Russia. For Russia, it's in their interest because they know they have too much capacity there. You're right. We've had a hard time convincing Congress of the importance of the Enterprise Fund, but we haven't given up yet on the Enterprise Fund. It's a good investment for our security. It's a good investment for the Department of Defense to make, and we're going to keep trying to convince folks up there to support it.
Program funds into the Defense Enterprise Fund?
We're looking at a number of options now for the future of the Enterprise Fund. I'll just remind you that the Enterprise Fund was established. It was actually a suggestion from Congress itself because the way we had previously done defense conversion, project by project, was rightly judged by the Congress, and Dr. Perry completely agreed, not as good as having the Enterprise Fund do it. So we set up the Enterprise Fund at the behest of Congress. It is the best way to do things. We always said that we were going to give it an initial capitalization, and then from then on it would become self-sustaining, and it would attract private capital. We want to get it to that point. That'll take another year or two to get it to that point, and then we won't be involved anymore. But we want to carry out that commitment to get it started.
Okay, any other questions? If not, thank you very much for coming.